Hello friends, welcome back to my channel, and today we are back with another simple but exciting tutorial. So what we are going to discuss in this video is about Python Flask tutorial, like how you can Dockerize a Python Flask app. So this tutorial I'm doing it because a lot of people has asked, like most of these Docker tutorials are based on Java based application or node based application. Why we are not creating any tutorial on Python Flask or .NET applications, right? So based on that, I wanted to create a tutorial where I can show you like how you can Dockerize a Python Flask app using Docker Compose, so that you can Dockerize your application. Then you can deploy your containers using Docker Compose. So in this case, what we will be using, we'll be using a Python Flask, and also we'll be having Redis as your caching component. So it will be a very simple application, but in your case you can use any kind of Python Flask app. Okay, so what we will do is how we'll see about in this tutorial, like how to convert your Python Flask application into a Docker container. So in order to do that, in our case we are going to use a simple Python Flask app with Redis caching. Okay, and also what we will see is like we'll see how to write a Docker file for building a Docker image for Python Flask app, and what all the dependencies you need for that app to be built, and also how we will see like how we can write a Docker Compose YAML file, so that when we deploy your application using Docker Compose, it can create all the containers. So let's get started. So before that, I would request you, like if you are new to my channel, or if you have not subscribed to my channel, I would request you to click on the subscribe button. Also like my video, share, and give your feedback in the comment section. Now I just want to show you a pictorial representation of what are the components or how we do this overall process. So in order to run this Python Flask app in Docker, you consider yourself as a developer, okay, or somebody is working as a developer who have a GitHub, right, where you will putting all your code. So in our case, we'll be using GitHub to store our code of our app, also the Docker file, Docker Compose, everything, so that once we create that, and we can use that. So in GitHub, you will be having all the content of your Python Flask app, and you will also have Redis as a caching for your application. And what we will do is we will build your application as a Docker image. So in order to that, we need to write a Docker file. So once you use the Docker file, we will build to a Docker image. We are not going to show pushing this image to Docker Hub, which you may already know in my other tutorials. You can use the same technologies or same method here. But in our case, we are not going to show it, so we are going to use the Docker image on the locally on the machine. Now once you build the Docker image, you need to deploy as a container. So for that, you are going to use Docker Compose, where we'll be writing our services, and then we will deploy our containers using Docker Compose. So that will be our overall agenda of this tutorial. So now let's get started on the demo in our hands-on process. So the first part I want to do is, like, I have a GitHub, and I have created a project called Python Flask Redis Docker project, and I don't have any content. It's just a license file and readme file. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this link so that I can clone this into my local machine. Then I will start creating the components, so that I can create the app, I can create the Docker file, I can create the Docker Compose. Then I can push those into this GitHub, so that I can use this GitHub as my base. So when I go to our Docker machine, right? So you can easily copy all these components into the Docker machine, then you can run it. So let me go to my GitHub. Okay, so I will go to, so I'm inside a C Git project, which is my folder. Okay, and what I want to do is I'm going to Git Clone, and I'm going to use this my GitHub repository, and I'm going to paste that so I can clone this project into my local. Okay, so once that is cloned, so you can see there are a lot of project. So I will go to inside that project, Python Flask Redis Docker project, and I will see there are already 2 files, right? Now I'm going to create files inside that folder. So I'm going to use my Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to first create a file called app.py. okay, so it's a Python file, so I want to create that. So the content of this file will be like this. Okay, so it's a simple component or simple application where I'm importing the Flask Redis component, and I'm going to use Redis as as a caching component, so that whenever there is a hit, we can get the count. So that will be stored, and it will be shown in your web page as a counter, right? So how many hits, whenever you refresh, the counter will change. So I'm going to save this file into that folder. So I'm going to save this file as app.py. So I will save it, and then if I go to my GitHub link, you can see there is a file called app.py, right? And if I check my git status, you should have one untracked file, right, which is called app.py. So we will fix these things later. So I just want to create all the necessary file. Now our app is ready. So our Python Flask app is ready. Now I want to create or Dockerize this app, right? So for that I need to write a Docker file. So inside the Docker file, I also need to specify what are the prerequisites, like your Redis component or Flask, which need to be installed, right? So you can run that inside the Docker files. For that I will create a file called requirements.txt, so that I can put all my dependencies there, and I can call that in the installation part. So I have created another file, and I will write the dependencies, which will be Flask and Redis, and I'm going to save this file as well. So I'm going to save this file as requirements.txt, okay, and I'm going to save into the same folder. Now if I go back to my GitHub, the folder, you can see I have 2 files, .app.py and requirements.txt header, right? And if I check git status, you can see there are 2 files which are untracked, right? So again, I will say let's finish all these things, then we will fix those issues. Okay, now I want to create one more file, so which will be the Docker file. So inside the Docker file, this should be the content, okay, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the base image, which would be the Python image, and I'm going to set a working directory, which is /code. It can be any other place also, but I'm just putting it as that. And I'm going to copy this requirement.txt to this folder, right? Then we are going to use pip install, and we are going to read the content from it. So we have to install Flask and Redis, which is listed here as a dependencies, right? So, or you can directly do that as well, like you can use pip install Flask and pip install Redis, but it will be a separate commands. But if you have a lot of dependencies you need to install, you can simply use your notepad, and you can put all those things into that, and you can simply call that here, and it will install it. Now after that, what we are going to do is we are going to copy the contents in our current folder, which will be the app.py, and the rest of the files which will be copied into /code, right? So the app.py is our main requirement part, so that has to be copied to our code. Then we are going to run that app.py as a Python component, right? So we're going to use Python app.py. So that will run our application, and we should be able to access that in our web browser. So let me save this as a Docker file. So once we use a Docker file, so that we can build our Docker image. So I'm going to save this as a Docker file. Okay, so let me go back to our folder, and unfortunately it have a extension of Docker file which is not required. Let me fix that. I will simply go to the folder, and I will just remove the extension, because we don't need the extension of Docker file. Okay, so it should be like this Docker file. Now we have this Docker file app.py, we have the requirements.txt. Now what we need is we also need our Docker compose, right? So we can use our Docker compose also ready, so that once we have everything ready, we can push our content into a GitHub. So I have created a new file, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the contents for our Docker compose. Now it's a very straightforward, simple Docker compose file. Okay, we are not having too much complications here. Like, we are not going to put too much environment variables or volumes, those kind of things we are not doing. It's basically what is happening is, like, we have two services or two containers will be running. So the first service is called Redis, and we are using the Redis image, and the container name will be Redis, and it will use the port 6379, right? And why it's important? Because we are using the same ports inside your app as well. So if you're using a different port, it has to be changed based on here as well. Now we are using another service called web. Okay, it can be any name, but it should use the name as it is for based on your configurations. The importance of this name for service is that when you use in your app, it has to match, because here if you see the host is Redis, right, and the port number is 6379, so it has to match here, otherwise it will not work. So you need to be careful there. Now what we are going to do for web is we are going to use build command, because we have our Docker file inside in this folder, right? So that's why the dot means, so it will use that dot Docker file to build our image for your Python Flask. So once that is built, you should be able to create the container, and the name would be web, and we are going to use the port 5000, and the volume we are mapping that current folder with code, right? And it's also depends on the Redis, because Redis container is depending, this web container have a dependency on the Redis container. So that is why we have this depend on. Okay, now I'm going to save this file as a docker compose.yaml. So I'm going to save this file as docker compose.yaml on this location, and if I go and list, you can see you should have all the files, right? app.py, docker compose, docker file, and our requirement.txt, right? Now if I go and check git status, we have all these 4 files, right, which are untracked. So what I will do is I will put git add and dot. So I want to add all the files. So now if I see git status, you should see all the files are committed, right? Changes to be committed. So it's been added. Now we have to commit those changes. So I will use git commit -m, and I'm going to give a comment like change the files, something like that. Okay, now if I run it, now you can see the commit has been done. So if I say git status, you can see we are ready now to push, right? So nothing to commit, we are ready to push. So what we do is we will use git push and -u and origin main, because our branch is called main. Okay, so we are going to push that into our GitHub. Okay, so let's do that. Now you can see it has been done, and if I go back here and if I refresh my page, you can see we have files came up now, right, which is app.py, docker compose file, requirement.txt, docker file, which is just few seconds before, right? So our project is ready now. So we have all our components. So I will also change this, because it has mentioned like coming soon, right? It's already coming now. So I will just commit that. So our project is ready now. So now what I will do is I'll use this code again, and I'm going to go to my machine, which is a Docker machine. So if you see, I have Docker installed, and if you don't know how to install Docker, you need to check that. Now what I want to do is I want to close this. So if you don't have Git here, you need to use Git as well. Okay, so I'm just running Git clone. If you don't have a Git here, you need to install Git before doing that, otherwise it will not work. Now you can see I have a folder called Python Flask, right? So I will go to this folder, and if you see, I have all the files, right? app.py, docker.compose, docker file, license, readme, requirement, text, all. Now what I want to do is I want to run the Docker Compose. So if you don't have Docker Compose installed, you have to install that as well. But in general, if you install Docker Compose also come along with that. Now what I will do is I will run Docker Compose up. If you want to run in detached mode, you can run -d. I just want to run Docker Compose up because you can see what is happening, right? Now you can see what it's doing. It's building the web container, right? So you can see it has run all those parameters. Now it's trying to build the rest of things, right? You can see it's doing its stuff, right? So now you can see it has completed the all process. Redis is running. It created two services, right? It's created Redis and it has created web as well. So two containers should be running now, and this took very quickly because I already have the image and everything downloaded. In your case, if the image is not available on the machine, it will take time to download the image for Python. It will download the Redis. It will has to install the Redis and Flask into our container. So it will take some time if you're doing it for the first time, okay, and if you don't have all the components available on the machine. Now our containers are running, and I have a different session. So if I go to Docker PS, you should be able to see the two containers running, right? So one for our Python application, and there is a Redis as well. Now what I want to do is I want to access this application through a web browser. For that, what you need to do is we need to use our IP address and the port 5000. So now if I run this IP address and the port 5000, you can see the message, welcome to the tips for you. The page has been viewed one time. If I refresh it, you can see the counter has changed to 2, right? If I refresh it again, it has changed to 3. So from where it is coming from our counter inside our app. So it's a pretty simple app where it's giving you the information, like whenever you refresh it, it will give you the number count. Okay, so what we did is, like, we have now two containers running, which is done as part of our Docker Compose YAML file, right, where we have defined our services, one for Redis and one for web, right? In the web, we are building our content from our Docker file. So the Docker file, you can see, like, we have used the Python, right, and we are just using our requirement.txt to install our Flask and Redis. So you can see pip install, we are installing that, and we are just going to copy the app.py to our location and just run it using Python. So it's a pretty simple app. You can use your own app, very complicated, but the process is same. You just need to install all the required requirement or dependencies. You create a Docker file, you build your app. You can run using Docker Compose, or if you want to run it manually, you build it manually using Docker build -t, and then you deploy it using Docker run command. But I would suggest this is the base. You can even push that image into your Docker hub, and you can use that your image into deploying using Kubernetes as well, because you can deploy it, you can pull that image anytime you want. So all these things you can do, but I want to show you the base, how you can create a Docker container of your Python Flask app. So this is what we did to run a Python Flask app in Docker. So I hope it's interesting for you and you were able to get good information. Check out my GitHub link, which I given into the video description. You can get all these documents and code there, so you can refer that. So I would request you, like, if you want to watch more videos like this, and if you are happy with my channel, click on the subscribe button, and also like my videos, share, give your feedback in the comment section, and thank you for watching.